You have 24 hours to demolish that eyesore, or we're contacting the sheriff." Those were the words the HOA president shrieked at me just before I unveiled a secret that would bring her whole world crashing down. I was only 3 days into the construction of my dream cabin when this woman marched onto my property, clipboard in hand and an attitude to match. Victoria Ashworth, the reigning queen of the HOA, was insisting I tear down my work because it breached community standards. The scent of pine from the new lumber mingled with her overpowering perfume as the gravel crunched under the tires of more SUVs, carrying her angry neighbors. She brandished legal documents, threatened exorbitant fines, and behaved as if she owned my land. Little did she realize, I possessed information that would completely reverse the power dynamic in this confrontation. It was information that would transform her threats into the most costly error of her life. Let me rewind and explain how this whole ordeal began. My name is Marcus Brennan. I'm a 45-year-old, newly divorced electrician who inherited 5 acres of Colorado mountain paradise from my eccentric uncle, Silas. After enduring months of courtroom battles and living in a confining city apartment, this land felt like my salvation. It was a place where I could build something tangible and perhaps persuade my teenage daughter, Emma, that her old man wasn't a total failure. Uncle Silas was always the family enigma. He vanished into the mountains back in 1980, only to reappear at Christmas smelling of wood smoke and diesel. He was always murmuring that the land held more secrets than it did trees. Most of my relatives dismissed him as the crazy hermit uncle. When his lawyer contacted me to say I had inherited his property, I suspected Uncle Silas had known something the rest of us didn't. The land was absolutely breathtaking. A creek babbled over smooth stones, the cries of hawks echoed against granite cliffs, and the sharp fragrance of pine sap combined with wild sage to create a natural perfume. An old concrete foundation marked a spot where Silas had begun some project, and there was a workshop that looked like it belonged in a frontier museum. Standing there, breathing in air that didn't taste of exhaust fumes, I felt a sense of hope for the first time in months. I liquidated my 401k, left my city job, and began constructing a modest log cabin. It was nothing elaborate, just a sturdy home where Emma could spend weekends and witness her dad creating something of value instead of dismantling his life. The rhythm of a hammer striking a nail and the satisfying sound of a saw cutting through timber felt like therapy after months of dealing with lawyers and paperwork. On the 3rd day of construction, she materialized. Victoria Ashworth stepped out of a pristine white BMW X5 like some corporate harbinger of doom. She was in her mid-50s, dressed in designer business casual, and clutched a leather portfolio like a shield. Her heels clicked on the rocky terrain with military-like precision, and her perfume, a floral assault, clashed so violently with the mountain air that it made my eyes water. "Excuse me," she announced, marching across my property as if she owned it. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" I placed my circular saw on the ground, taking note of how she pronounced individual, as if it left an unpleasant taste. "Marcus Brennan. I'm building a cabin on my land. You are Victoria Ashworth, the Pine Valley HOA president." She leafed through her papers with dramatic authority. "This construction is in violation of multiple community covenants. You have no permits, no architectural review, and no environmental assessment. Frankly, this rustic aesthetic poses a significant threat to our property values." I glanced around at the pristine wilderness that stretched to the horizon. "What community? I don't see any other houses." "The Pine Valley Homeowners Association governs all residential properties within our jurisdiction," she stated, producing an official-looking document. "Your uncle signed these covenants when we were formed 6 months ago. You have inherited his obligations." 6 months ago? Uncle Silas passed away 8 months ago. She presented me with a cease and desist order that demanded an immediate halt to construction, along with a bill for $2,500 in accumulated violation fees. "Remove all materials within 48 hours, Victoria declared. "Daily fines will commence at $500 and will double weekly. We take the protection of our community standards very seriously." The threat lingered in the mountain air like smoke. But then she delivered her true message. "Let me be blunt, Mr. Brennan." Her gaze swept over my work clothes, my beat-up truck, and my calloused hands. "This is not the kind of neighborhood where people in your situation generally thrive. We uphold certain expectations regarding the quality of our residence. I would hate for your daughter to be embarrassed by any unpleasantness. The mention of Emma felt like a punch to the gut. This woman had investigated me. She knew about my divorce, my financial difficulties, and my daughter. Are you threatening my family? The words came out colder than I had intended. Victoria's smile was as sharp as the winter wind. I'm offering some friendly advice. Some battles are not worth fighting, especially when you are so clearly outmatched. She climbed back into her BMW, but paused before she left. 48 hours, Mr. Brennan. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. As her taillights faded down the mountain road, Uncle Silas's last words echoed in my mind. Don't let anyone push you around. I stared at the cease and desist order, then at my half-finished cabin. Victoria Ashworth believed she held all the power. She was about to find out just how catastrophically mistaken she was. Victoria didn't give me 48 hours. She returned the following morning, accompanied by a lawyer and an air of confidence befitting someone with handcuffs at the ready. A battered Honda Civic pulled up behind her BMW, and out stepped the most pathetic excuse for legal counsel I had ever witnessed. Douglas Crinky looked as though he'd gotten his law degree from a cereal box. He wore a cheap suit, a coffee-stained tie, and carried a briefcase held together by duct tape and sheer desperation. Mr. Brennan, Victoria proclaimed with theatrical gravity, you are being served with official legal documents. Cease construction immediately and prepare for the financial repercussions. Cranky nervously shuffled his papers. Pursuant to the Pine Valley HOA covenants, you are liable for $15,000 in retroactive violation penalties. Furthermore, you were never provided with the proper HOA disclosure documents during the property transfer, which voids your claims of ownership. 15 grand for building on my own land. The smell of Cranky's nervous perspiration combined with Victoria's overpowering perfume to create a toxic cloud of legal intimidation. I'll have my attorney review these, I stated calmly. Victoria's laugh was as sharp as cracking ice. You can't afford an attorney, Mr. Brennan. Save yourself the humiliation. The moment they departed, I drove directly to the county courthouse. Betty, the friendly clerk, assisted me in sifting through property records. The musty scent of old documents and the buzz of fluorescent lights created a detective movie ambience as I unearthed something that made my blood boil. The Pine Valley HOA had been established exactly 6 months ago, 2 months after Uncle Silas had died. I recalled my divorce attorney once saying that timing is everything in legal documents, and this timing was impossible. The boundaries were drawn like a perfect bullseye around my property, encompassing just 12 houses. My 5 acres constituted 60% of their total land area. That's mighty suspicious, Betty whispered, leaning over the property maps. It looks like someone drew those lines specifically to entrap your uncle's land. I retrieved more records, and every HOA member was either a relative of Victoria's or an employee of her husband's construction company. This wasn't community governance. It was organized crime with a clipboard. I'd read enough legal thrillers to know that deceased individuals cannot sign new contracts, nor can you be bound by agreements established after you already own the land. It was time for my counterpunch. I contacted Sarah Kim, a razor-sharp real estate attorney. Her office smelled of fresh coffee and pure resolve. This is legally impossible, Sarah declared, spreading the documents across her conference table. You cannot retroactively bind a deceased person to new covenants formed after their death. I've encountered HOA scams before, but this is brazen even by their standards. We're filing countersuits, Sarah announced, for harassment, false claims, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Plus, we'll investigate how they included your property in boundaries drawn after the ownership transfer. But Victoria escalated quickly. 2 days later, she convened an emergency community meeting without inviting me. Of course, my neighbor Jake attended and gave me a full report over beers on my porch. The evening air carried the scent of wood smoke from distant fireplaces, mixed with the pine forest fragrance that reminded me why I had fallen for this place. She's got everyone terrified, Jake said. She's claiming you're some dangerous drifter with a criminal record. It's all lies, but fear spreads faster than truth in small communities. Then the digital warfare began. Victoria launched a Pine Valley Community Safety Facebook group, where she posted my photo, stolen from an old union newsletter, alongside warnings about transient criminals threatening our children and property values. The comments were a stream of vicious poison. Get this predator out. My kids aren't safe. The sheriff needs to act now. But Victoria's arrogance would be her downfall. In her haste to demonstrate that the HOA had the funds for legal action against troublemakers, she publicly posted their financial records. Those numbers revealed a shocking story. $847,000 had been collected in special assessments over 6 months from just 12 houses. That amounted to over $70,000 per family. For what? There were no community amenities, no shared facilities, and no infrastructure projects. I had learned during my divorce that legitimate expenses always leave a paper trail. When lawyers can't show you exactly where your money went, it usually ended up in someone's pocket. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee when I presented her with the Facebook evidence. She has just publicly admitted to massive financial fraud. Victoria handed us a federal case on a silver platter. The next morning brought Victoria's nuclear option. A county inspector's truck rolled into my driveway. The inspector, clearly ill at ease, handed me a citation for multiple building violations that would shut down construction entirely. "Sorry, buddy," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. "Orders from the top. Someone has serious influence at the county office." The metallic taste of corruption hung in the mountain air like smoke from a distant fire. As his truck disappeared down the road, I realized Victoria had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had escalated from civil harassment to government corruption, using taxpayer-funded officials to settle a personal score. But in doing so, she had just handed me the ultimate weapon. Federal agencies don't just investigate financial fraud. They also investigate public officials who accept bribes to harass private citizens. Victoria thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She had no idea I was about to overturn the entire board. Victoria's next move came at 3 a.m., with the sound of breaking glass and the acrid smell of diesel fuel burning my nostrils and jolting me awake. I stumbled outside to find my construction site resembling a war zone. Someone had taken a baseball bat to my lumber pile, scattering 2x4s like giant pickup sticks. My generator was on its side, its fuel soaking into the pine needles with a sharp chemical odor that made my eyes water. Roofing nails glittered across my access road like deadly confetti, strategically placed to shred the tires of any vehicle that dared to cross. The message was crystal clear. Victoria was finished with legal games. By sunrise, I found my truck sitting on 4 flat tires, and an anonymous EPA complained in my email, alleging that I was destroying sensitive wetlands. The wetlands in question were a tiny seasonal creek that had been babbling through my property since before Victoria was even born. But the psychological warfare was only just beginning. Around noon, cars began to appear near my driveway entrance. They weren't completely blocking access. That would be overtly illegal, but they were positioned just so that I would have to perform automotive gymnastics to reach my own land. When I approached the drivers, they claimed to be concerned citizens exercising their constitutional right to park on public roads. The taste of feigned innocence was more bitter than the diesel that still lingered in the air. Then came the fake safety signs. Official-looking hazardous construction zone, authorized personnel only, warnings sprouted along the mountain road like poisonous mushrooms. They appeared legitimate enough to deceive my contractor, Pete, who called me in a panic. "Marcus, I've got 3 customers asking if I'm licensed for hazardous waste cleanup," Pete said, his voice tight with worry. "Word is spreading that your site is contaminated. I can't afford to lose other contracts over this." Victoria had weaponized my community connections against me. I remembered reading somewhere that the best con artists always turn your own resources into weapons, and she was proving that theory perfectly. But sabotage signaled desperation, and desperate people make traceable mistakes. Sarah and I spent the next day following paper trails at the courthouse. The musty odor of old documents mixed with Betty the clerk's coffee created a detective movie atmosphere as we uncovered Victoria's true game. 6 months ago, Mountain Vista Resorts had approached the county with plans for a $50 million luxury resort. The proposed location required my 5 acres as its scenic centerpiece for spa views, golf course elevation, and helicopter landing pad proximity. According to the development agreement, they couldn't break ground without acquiring all residential properties within the designated tourism corridor. My land wasn't just in Victoria's way. It was the golden key to her treasure chest. "Look at this consultation fee," Betty whispered, pointing to a line item buried in the county planning documents. Mountain Vista paid someone $400,000 for community relations consulting. Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "That's not consulting. That's a bribe with a business card." Suddenly, Victoria's aggressive timeline made perfect sense. She wasn't just collecting HOA fees. She was earning a massive commission for delivering my property to the developers. Every day I held out was costing her hundreds of thousands of dollars in resort profits. That night, I put my electrician skills to use and installed a comprehensive security system, complete with motion sensors and night vision cameras. If Victoria wanted to escalate to criminal behavior, she would do so in high-definition color. I didn't have to wait long for the main event. Around midnight, a pickup truck crept down my access road with its headlights off, its engine barely a whisper in the mountain silence. The driver, wearing a hoodie that couldn't conceal his familiar jawline, began pouring something from a gas can near my lumber pile. My cameras captured everything in perfect detail, including the moment he looked directly into the lens like a deer caught in headlights. It was Tommy Ashworth, Victoria's son, a 20-something kid who had apparently inherited his mother's talent for felony-level stupidity. The next morning brought my counterpunch. I walked into the sheriff's office with USB drives full of video evidence. Tommy's midnight arson attempt, complete with facial recognition and license plate identification. Suddenly, Victoria's concerned citizen narrative crumbled faster than her son's alibi under questioning. But I wasn't finished digging. The HOA's public filings revealed a treasure trove of financial fraud. Payments for security consulting to companies that didn't exist, invoices for landscaping services from Victoria's brother-in-law, who lived in Florida, and legal research fees that would make Supreme Court justices blush. Victoria had been systematically looting the HOA treasury while positioning herself for the resort payoff. She was double-dipping, stealing from her neighbors today while planning to cash in on their land tomorrow. As I watched Tommy's arson footage for the 5th time that evening, with the mountain air carrying the scent of pine and approaching storm clouds, I realized something crucial. Victoria wasn't just greedy. She was trapped. The resort deal likely had deadlines, and every day I remained on my land, she risked losing everything. Cornered animals bite hardest just before they perish, but they also make the most spectacular mistakes. Victoria's response to her son's arrest was swift, vicious, and utterly unhinged. The following morning, I woke to find a process server at my door with an emergency injunction. Victoria was now claiming I was constructing an illegal commercial facility and demanding that the court force me to demolish everything immediately. The paperwork alleged I was intending to operate a transient housing operation for undesirable elements that would destroy the moral fabric of our community. The smell of fresh legal ink mingled with the morning pine air as I read through 15 pages of creative fiction. Victoria was seeking $100,000 in community damages and was requesting an immediate restraining order to prevent me from setting foot on my own property. But that was merely the warm-up act. By noon, 3 county inspectors had swarmed my land like locusts. Environmental compliance, building safety, septic evaluation, all of them were writing citations for violations that didn't exist. The lead inspector, Rodriguez, kept apologizing under his breath as he photographed my perfectly legal electrical work. "Sorry, man," he whispered. "Orders from way above my pay grade. Someone's paying serious money to make your life hell." The metallic taste of corruption hung heavier than the mountain fog rolling in. During my divorce, I had learned that when legal intimidation fails, bureaucratic harassment becomes the weapon of choice. Endless inspections, impossible compliance demands, death by 1,000 paper cuts. But Victoria saved her cruelest blow for last. That afternoon, my ex-wife, Linda, called, her voice trembling with fury. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? Emma's friends are showing her Facebook posts calling you a sex offender. She's locked herself in her room crying, asking if her daddy is really a monster." My blood ran Arctic cold. "What post?" "Some community safety group with your photo and warnings about registered predators targeting children." Complete lies. "But Emma's classmates are treating her like she's contaminated." Linda's voice cracked. "She wants to know if she's safe visiting you anymore." The thought of my 15-year-old daughter reading those lies enduring the whispers and pointing from her friends, made my vision blur with rage. Victoria had weaponized my own child against me, crossing every conceivable line. It's all fabricated, Linda. I'm fighting a corrupt HOA that's trying to steal my land for developers. Fix this, she snapped. Some judges consider social media scandals harmful to minors. This could affect your custody rights. After she hung up, I sat in Uncle Silas's workshop, surrounded by the scent of old wood and motor oil, feeling the weight of 40 years of family history pressing down on me. This was no longer about property. Victoria was threatening my relationship with the only person who truly mattered. But her desperation had just created my opportunity. That evening, my neighbor Jake knocked with urgent news. Marcus, Victoria's group posted another emergency alert, claiming you threatened to burn down the neighborhood. They're using a photo of you holding what looks like a weapon. It was actually my circular saw, but it was photographed to look menacing. The Facebook comments were a feeding frenzy. Call SWAT, armed and dangerous. Protect our children. But Jake leaned closer with the real intelligence. 3 HOA families approached me privately. Victoria is threatening their property assessments if they don't sign statements against you. They're terrified of her now, not you. More importantly, the HOA treasurer, Beth Morrison, had been asking uncomfortable questions about missing money. Victoria had been dodging audit requests while demanding more special assessments from members. Beth found invoices for companies that don't exist, Jake whispered. Payments for work that was never performed. She's demanding a full financial review, and Victoria's panicking. This gave me the counterpunch I needed. I called Sarah immediately. Victoria's financial house of cards is collapsing. If we can force an emergency HOA audit before she destroys the evidence, we've got her. Even better, Sarah said. False sex offender accusations are federal defamation crimes. We can file criminal charges while pursuing the financial fraud. But I wanted to hit Victoria where it truly hurt, her wallet. The next morning, I drove to every business Victoria's family owned or frequented. Armed with screenshots of her false posts about me being a dangerous predator, I had very calm, factual conversations with the managers about their liability for supporting defamatory campaigns against local citizens. Small mountain communities thrive on reputation. When the auto shop, the grocery store, and the hardware store all suddenly became too busy to serve the Ashworth family, word spread faster than wildfire. By afternoon, Victoria's own mother had called her, demanding an explanation for why the family was being shunned by local businesses. That evening, as storm clouds gathered over the mountains and rain began to patter against my cabin windows, I felt the tide finally turning. Victoria had overplayed her hand, attacking on too many fronts simultaneously, while her financial crimes were being exposed. But I also knew that desperate criminals don't surrender quietly. They tend to detonate everything around them. The smell of the approaching rain mixed with pine sap reminded me of Uncle Silas's final words about the land having secrets. Tomorrow, I would discover exactly what he meant, and Victoria Ashworth would learn that some secrets hold the power to destroy entire kingdoms. The next morning, while prying up floorboards in Uncle Silas's workshop, my crowbar struck something that was definitely not wood. The metallic clang echoed through the dusty space like a bell heralding destiny. Beneath 40 years of accumulated sawdust and motor oil stains, I uncovered a steel lockbox the size of a briefcase, painted military green and secured with a combination that had likely been set during the Carter administration. The musty scent of old documents hit me like a wave when I finally managed to open it using Uncle Silas's birthday as the combination. The old romantic had used the date he purchased the land. Inside were manila folders as thick as phone books, corporate seals that felt as substantial as gold coins, and enough legal paperwork to overwhelm a courtroom. But it was the incorporation certificate on top that made my hands tremble. Brennan Holdings LLC, incorporated on March 15, 1998. Sole proprietor, Silas J. Brennan. My uncle hadn't just owned 5 acres of mountain paradise. He had secretly formed a holding company 27 years ago and used it to quietly acquire something that would alter everything. The subsequent document explained how he had executed the financial coup of the century. In 2010, the original developer who built the Pine Valley subdivision went bankrupt during the housing crash. While everyone else was fleeing from real estate, Uncle Silas had stepped in like a phantom and bought up all the defaulted mortgage debt for for pennies on the dollar. He didn't buy the houses, but the actual land beneath them. Every single property in what would become Victoria's HOA kingdom was constructed on land that Uncle Silas owned through his holding company. The homeowners had been faithfully paying their mortgages for over a decade, believing they owned their land. Legally, however, they were tenants. The property management company that collected their monthly payments forwarded everything to Brennan Holdings LLC, which explained how a mountain hermit could afford his comfortable lifestyle. I was holding the deeds to an entire neighborhood, 47 houses, 12 of which had formed Victoria's precious HOA, all of them situated on land that now belonged to me. The faint scent of Uncle Silas's pipe tobacco still lingered in the workshop air, mixed with the weight of documents that felt as if they could crush mountains. I understood now why he had kept this secret buried. Owning people's homes without their knowledge is the kind of revelation that can destroy families and fracture communities. But it also meant something else, something that made my pulse hammer against my temples. Victoria Ashworth, HOA president and queen of harassment, had been collecting fees and threatening fines on land she didn't own. Her own house, the command center for her campaign of intimidation, was situated on property where she was 3 months behind on rent. I could legally evict her with 30 days' notice. The bank records in the lockbox showed everything. Monthly rent payments flowing into Brennan Holdings accounts, property tax receipts, and maintenance expenses for roads and utilities that the homeowners believed they were paying for through their HOA fees. Uncle Silas had been the invisible landlord for an entire community, collecting rent through a management company while allowing people to believe they owned their land. The incorporation papers were genuine, stamped with official state seals and notarized by attorneys whose signatures could be verified. The property deeds matched perfectly with county records. The bank accounts were real, and the money trail was as clear as mountain stream water. I sat in Uncle Silas's workshop chair, surrounded by the scent of old leather and forgotten secrets, holding papers that granted me more power over Victoria Ashworth than she had ever dreamed possible. I could evict every HOA member who had participated in harassing me. I could sell the entire development to Mountain Vista Resorts and become a millionaire overnight. I could destroy lives in the same way Victoria had attempted to destroy mine. But Uncle Silas's final words echoed in the dusty air. Don't let anyone push you around. He hadn't said to push back harder. He had said not to let them push you around. There was a distinction, and that distinction would determine what kind of man I chose to be. The weight of Uncle Silas's secret sat on my shoulders like a lead blanket as I spread the incorporation documents across Sarah's conference table. The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with the gravity of our discovery. I was no longer just fighting an HOA. I was the landlord of everyone who had been trying to ruin me. This is legally bulletproof, Sarah stated, examining the corporate seal under her desk lamp. Your uncle was meticulous. Every document was properly filed, every payment tracked, and every legal requirement met for 27 years. She took out a legal pad and began to sketch out our options like a general planning a campaign. Plan A, reveal your landlord's status immediately and negotiate the dissolution of the HOA. It's clean, simple, and gets Victoria off your back permanently. Plan B, selective enforcement. Terminate the leases only for the ringleaders of the harassment, Victoria, her family, and perhaps 2 or 3 others. Let the innocent neighbors stay. Plan C, the full nuclear option. Media exposure of the entire scheme, a federal investigation into the HOA's financial crimes, and complete community upheaval. I thought about Emma reading those vile Facebook posts, about my neighbors who had been manipulated by Victoria's lies, and about Uncle Silas choosing to keep this power hidden for decades. What about Plan D? Use this leverage to build something better. Sarah's eyebrows rose. Explain. Victoria has been stealing from these people while lying about property ownership. What if we expose her financial crimes, but offer the community a path forward? Reduced rents, actual ownership opportunities. Turn this toxic HOA into something that helps families instead of destroying them. While Sarah researched legal precedents, I called my electrician buddy Jake to assist with the technical preparations. We drove to his shop, where the familiar scent of copper wire and electrical components reminded me that I possessed skills beyond legal warfare. You're definitely going to need this recorded, Jake said, helping me test a professional-grade audio system. When you drop this bombshell, You'll want every word documented for your legal protection. Back in my truck, I reflected on something I had learned during my apprenticeship years ago. The most powerful electrical systems aren't the ones that generate the biggest sparks. They're the ones that deliver precisely the right amount of current to accomplish the task. Too little, and nothing happens. Too much, and you burn down the house. This situation required a precisely calibrated application of power. That afternoon, I brought in Beth Morrison, the HOA treasurer who had been asking uncomfortable questions about the finances. We met at a neutral location, the local diner, where the scent of apple pie and honest conversation felt like a sanctuary after weeks of legal battles. I've been suspicious about our books for months. Beth confided over coffee that tasted like liquid courage. Victoria has been dodging audit requests while collecting unprecedented fees. We've paid $847,000 in special assessments this year alone, but I can't find any records of where that money went. I slid photocopies of Victoria's fraudulent invoices across the table. Companies that didn't exist, services never rendered, and consulting fees that would make Congress blush. Beth's hands trembled as she reviewed the evidence. She's been stealing from us while threatening our homes. But Marcus, even if we expose her, how do we protect the families who've invested their life savings in these properties? That was when I knew that Plan D was the right choice. Over the next 2 days, Sarah and I crafted a presentation that would serve multiple purposes. We would expose Victoria's crimes while offering the community a path forward that honored both justice and compassion. The legal documents were prepared in triplicate, stored in multiple secure locations, with copies sent to federal investigators who specialized in HOA fraud cases. I also reached out to Emma for the first time since Linda's angry phone call. My daughter's voice was small and hurt when she answered, but I could hear hope creeping in as I explained the truth about Victoria's lies. So, you're not really in trouble, Dad? The stuff online about you being dangerous, it's all fake. Completely fabricated, sweetheart. And soon, everyone will know the truth. But Emma, I need you to understand something important. When people try to hurt you with lies, the best response isn't more lies. It's the truth, delivered at exactly the right moment. The community meeting was scheduled for Friday night at the Pine Valley Community Center. Victoria had called it as an emergency session to address the dangerous individual threatening our neighborhood. She had no idea she was about to provide the perfect stage for her own downfall. As I sat in my completed cabin that evening, listening to the creek babble through the pine trees and watching the stars appear in the clear mountain sky, I felt Uncle Silas's presence in the night air. He had kept this secret for decades, waiting for the right person and the right moment to use it wisely. That moment had arrived, and unlike Victoria's campaign of destruction, this revelation would build something better from the ashes of her greed. Victoria's desperation soared to new heights when she attempted to have me committed to a mental health facility. The paperwork arrived on Tuesday morning via an emergency court filing, a petition claiming I was exhibiting signs of severe psychological instability and making credible threats against community members. Victoria had somehow persuaded a judge that I was dangerous enough to warrant an immediate psychiatric evaluation and possible involuntary commitment. The smell of fresh legal documents mingling with my morning coffee created a surreal breakfast atmosphere as I read through her latest work of fiction. According to Victoria's sworn statement, I had been obsessively surveilling neighbors, making threats about burning down houses, and displaying classic signs of paranoid delusion and violent ideation. She had even included witness statements from 3 HOA members who claimed I had approached them at night, ranting about conspiracies and vowing to make everyone pay for what they had done to me. It was a complete fabrication, but it looked terrifyingly official. By noon, the situation had escalated beyond legal documents. A convoy of pickup trucks materialized at the end of my access road. Victoria's Citizen Patrol, armed with hunting rifles and self-righteous fury. They weren't technically on my property, but their message was unmistakable. Step out of line and face frontier justice. The metallic taste of fear mixed with the mountain air as I watched them through binoculars from my cabin porch. These weren't professional security guards. They were scared neighbors who had been convinced I was a genuine threat to their families. Jake called with even worse news. Marcus, Victoria's brother-in-law, is the county sheriff. He's planning to serve that mental health warrant this afternoon with a full SWAT response. He claims you're armed and dangerous, requiring maximum force protocols. My blood ran cold. During my days as an electrician, I had wired the homes of men who had been swatted over neighbor disputes. Too many of those stories ended with body bags and accidental shootings during dynamic entries. But Victoria's overreach was also creating unexpected allies. That afternoon, Emma called, crying, not from embarrassment this time, but from fury. "Dad, kids at school are showing me posts claiming you're a terrorist planning to shoot up the neighborhood. This is insane. How can she just lie like this?" "Because desperate people do desperate things, sweetheart. But sometimes their desperation becomes their downfall." Emma's voice grew steely. She had more of her old man's fight in her than I had realized. "What can I do to help? I'm not letting this crazy woman destroy our family with lies." While Victoria was busy portraying me as a dangerous lunatic, she was also frantically trying to cover her financial tracks. Sarah's investigator friend discovered that Victoria had been making substantial cash withdrawals from HOA accounts, $127,000 in the past 2 weeks alone. The money was supposedly for enhanced security consulting and emergency legal expenses. Even more telling, she had been pressuring HOA members to sign loyalty pledges, promising not to cooperate with any outside investigators trying to destroy our community. 3 families had already approached Sarah quietly, terrified of Victoria, but unwilling to publicly oppose her. But Victoria's nuclear option backfired spectacularly. The mental health petition required supporting documentation from medical professionals. Victoria had submitted a psychological evaluation from a Dr. Richard Peton, claiming he had observed me displaying textbook symptoms of antisocial personality disorder with violent tendencies. The problem was, Dr. Peton had been deceased for 6 months. Sarah's paralegal discovered the death certificate while verifying the evaluation's authenticity. Victoria had literally forged a psychological assessment using a deceased psychiatrist's stolen letterhead and signature stamp. That single, desperate lie had just upgraded her legal troubles from civil fraud to federal document forgery, a felony that carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. "She's completely unraveling," Sarah said, reviewing the fraudulent evaluation. "This level of criminal behavior suggests someone facing massive financial exposure. The resort deal must have deadlines she can't extend." But Victoria wasn't finished destroying herself. Thursday evening brought her final, most spectacular mistake. Frustrated by the delayed SWAT response, it turns out judges get cranky about obviously forged medical documents. Victoria decided to take matters into her own hands. Security cameras caught her sneaking onto my property around midnight, carrying what appeared to be accelerant and matches. Her plan was apparently to set a small fire near my lumber pile and then call 911, claiming I was burning evidence of my criminal activities. The irony was perfect. Victoria Ashworth, who had been calling me an arsonist for weeks, was literally attempting arson to frame me for arson. But my upgraded security system included motion-activated floodlights that turned midnight into noon the second she crossed my property line. Victoria found herself standing in my driveway, holding a gas can and road flares, illuminated like an actress on Broadway, with 3 different camera angles recording her every move. Her scream of surprise and rage echoed across the mountain valley, loud enough to wake bears in neighboring counties. As I watched her scramble back to her BMW, I realized that Victoria had just handed me the ultimate trump card, video evidence of her attempting to commit the exact crime she had been accusing me of planning. Tomorrow's community meeting was going to be even more interesting than I had anticipated. Victoria's final, desperate gambit arrived with sirens, flashing lights, and the kind of media circus that permanently destroys lives. On Friday morning, I awoke to the sound of helicopter rotors and the acrid smell of exhaust fumes from a dozen emergency vehicles parked across my access road. Through my cabin windows, I could see news vans, sheriff's deputies, and what looked like half the county's emergency response team establishing a perimeter around my property. My phone was buzzing with missed calls from reporters, all asking variations of the same question. How do you respond to allegations that you're holding your neighborhood hostage with explosive devices? Explosive devices? I stepped onto my porch, holding a cup of coffee, and immediately had 6 rifle scopes trained on my chest. "Marcus Brennan," Sheriff Davidson's voice boomed through a megaphone. "You are surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. The taste of surreal terror mixed with the mountain air as I realized Victoria had played her nuclear card. She had convinced law enforcement that I was some kind of domestic terrorist preparing for a violent standoff. Jake's voice crackled through my phone. Marcus, don't move. Victoria filed reports claiming you threatened to blow up the community center during tonight's meeting. She's got photos of you handling suspicious packages and testimony from 3 witnesses. The suspicious packages were bags of concrete mix from my cabin foundation. The witnesses were probably the same imaginary people who had provided statements for her fraudulent psychological evaluation. But this time, Victoria had overestimated the gullibility of law enforcement. Sheriff Davidson approached my porch cautiously, his expression more embarrassed than aggressive. Marcus, I know this is probably, but we've got federal authorities breathing down our necks about credible terrorist threats. I need you to let us search the property so we can clear this mess up. Search away, Sheriff. But you might want to check out the security footage from last night first. I handed him the USB drive containing Victoria's midnight arson attempt. Davidson's face went through several interesting shades of color as he watched our HOA president caught red-handed with accelerant and matches, trying to burn down the very property she claimed I wanted to destroy. Well, he muttered, that's going to complicate her credibility significantly. While the bomb squad spent 3 hours confirming that concrete mix was, in fact, concrete mix, Sarah was busy filing emergency motions to have Victoria arrested for filing false police reports, attempted arson, and making terrorist threat hoaxes, federal crimes that would put her away for decades. But the media circus was just getting started. By afternoon, news crews from Denver had arrived, drawn by reports of a mountain standoff with an alleged domestic terrorist. Victoria, ever the opportunist, positioned herself as the heroic community leader protecting innocent families from a dangerous extremist. Standing in front of the cameras with perfect makeup and practiced tears, she painted a picture of a peaceful neighborhood terrorized by an unstable outsider with a grudge against civilization itself. This man has threatened our children, destroyed our sense of safety, and now he's apparently prepared to commit mass violence rather than follow simple community guidelines. Victoria sobbed into the microphones. We just want our neighborhood back. The performance was Academy Award caliber, if the Academy gave awards for creative fiction. But Victoria's media strategy contained a fatal flaw. In her rush to appear sympathetic, she had agreed to multiple live interviews without consulting lawyers, and live television doesn't allow for editing out inconvenient truths. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Maria Santos, had done her homework. During what Victoria thought would be a softball interview, Maria casually mentioned the HOA's financial irregularities. Mrs. Ashworth, records show your association has collected nearly $850,000 in special assessments this year. Can you explain where that money was spent? Victoria's confident expression flickered like a candle in the wind. Well, we've had significant legal expenses dealing with this dangerous individual. But the legal expenses listed in your public filings total only $23,000. Where did the other $827,000 go? The pause that followed lasted about 3 seconds on television, but felt like 3 years in real time. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air as her brain tried to manufacture an answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. That's confidential community business, she finally stammered. Confidential? Mrs. Ashworth, you're discussing this matter on live television while accusing your neighbor of terrorism. Surely, financial transparency is relevant to your credibility. By evening, the story had shifted from dangerous mountain hermit threatens community to HOA president accused of massive fraud while filing false terror reports. Social media was buzzing with questions about Victoria's financial management and the suspicious timing of her escalating accusations. As the last news van disappeared down the mountain road, leaving behind only tire tracks and the lingering smell of diesel exhaust, I realized Victoria had just committed professional suicide on live television. Tonight's community meeting would be less about her accusations against me and more about her explanations to the neighbors whose money she had been stealing. The hunted had just become the hunter. The Pine Valley Community Center had never seen a crowd like this. 89 people were packed into a space designed for perhaps 60, with news cameras positioned along the walls and county officials occupying the front row like judges at a trial. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with the scent of old coffee and decades-old carpet, creating an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. Victoria stood at the podium like a general addressing her troops before battle. Her PowerPoint presentation was titled, "Protecting Our Community, the Marcus Brennan Threat Assessment." She was dressed for victory, a sharp business suit, perfect makeup, and a voice projection that would make theater directors weep with envy. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, clicking to a slide showing my cabin. "We gather tonight to address the clear and present danger that Marcus Brennan represents to our peaceful community." I sat in the back row, wearing my cleanest work shirt and holding a leather document folder that contained enough legal dynamite to level mountains. Sarah sat beside me, occasionally glancing at her phone, where federal investigators were sending real-time updates about Victoria's financial crimes. Victoria's presentation was a masterful piece of manipulation. Photos of my threatening construction project, screenshots of my menacing social media presence, actually pictures of electrical work I had posted to help other contractors, and charts showing declining property values in areas with transient populations. "This individual owes our community $97,000 in accumulated fines and legal fees," Victoria announced, her voice rising with righteous indignation. "He has repeatedly threatened violence against our families, attempted to intimidate our children, and yesterday was investigated by federal authorities for terrorist activities." The crowd murmured with fearful approval. These were good people who had been fed a steady diet of lies for months, and Victoria's performance was convincing enough to sell ice to Eskimos. "Furthermore," she continued, clicking to a financial slide, "Mr. Brennan's continued presence threatens a major economic development opportunity that could benefit every family in this room. Mountain Vista Resorts has offered our community a partnership in a $50 million project that would create jobs and increase property values significantly." There it was. The real motivation, finally revealed in public, recorded by 3 news cameras and witnessed by county officials. Victoria had just admitted on the record that this entire harassment campaign was about clearing my land for developers. She opened the floor for victim impact statements, and 3 rehearsed neighbors delivered tearful testimonies about feeling unsafe and terrorized by my presence. The performance was so synchronized it resembled community theater. Then Victoria made the mistake that would haunt her forever. "Does anyone else have concerns about this dangerous individual threatening our community?" I stood up slowly, my leather folder tucked under one arm. "I do, actually." Victoria's confident smile faltered like a mask slipping. You're not a member of this community. You have no right to speak here." "Actually, Victoria," I said, walking calmly toward the front, "I think you'll find I have every right to speak. In fact, I have more rights in this room than anyone else." The crowd's murmur shifted from supportive to confused. Victoria's face was turning the color of old snow as I approached the podium. "My name is Marcus Brennan," I announced to the room, "and I am the sole owner of Brennan Holdings, LLC. I opened my folder and removed Uncle Silas's incorporation documents, holding them high enough for the cameras to capture, which means I am the legal landlord of every single house in this subdivision." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear individual heartbeats. Then the room exploded into chaos. Gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people turned to stare at neighbors they had never realized were fellow tenants. Victoria grabbed for my documents like a drowning woman reaching for a life preserver. "That's impossible. This is our neighborhood. We own these homes. You own the structures, Victoria, but the land underneath belongs to me, and has for 27 years, through my uncle's holding company." I spread the property deeds across the podium like playing cards. "Every monthly payment you thought was going to your mortgage company was actually rent forwarded to Brennan Holdings. Every HOA fee you've been collecting, you've been stealing money from people for managing land you don't own." Sheriff Davidson stepped forward, his expression grim with understanding. "Mrs. Ashworth, you've been collecting association fees on property that belongs to Mr. Brennan." Victoria's mask finally cracked completely. "You can't do this. I've spent years building this community. You're just some drifter who doesn't belong here." "Actually," I said, pulling out the rent payment records, "you're 3 months behind on your own rent, which means I have legal grounds to evict you with 30 days' notice." The room erupted again. Victoria lunged for the documents, screaming about property rights and community standards, until Sheriff Davidson was forced to restrain her. "But I'm not here for revenge," I announced over the chaos. "I'm here to offer a partnership. Those of you who participated in the harassment campaigns have 30 days to find new housing. For everyone else, your rent has just been cut in half, and we're going to build a real community together." As federal agents entered the room to arrest Victoria for wire fraud, her final scream echoed through the mountains. "You can't do this to me. I am this community." But communities are not built on theft and lies. They are built on truth. 3 months later, I was sitting on my cabin porch watching neighborhood kids play safely in what used to be Victoria's restricted access common area when Emma arrived for her weekend visit with a huge smile and news that made my heart soar. "Dad, I got into Colorado State with a full scholarship," she announced, wrapping me in a bear hug that smelled of her mother's shampoo and teenage hope. "And you know what convinced the admissions committee? My essay about how my father taught me that real strength isn't about getting revenge. It's about building something better from the ashes of corruption." Victoria Ashworth was serving 18 months in federal prison, plus paying $150,000 in restitution to the families she had defrauded. 6 of her harassment enablers had quietly moved away, their leases terminated, and their crimes documented for posterity. The remaining 41 neighbors had embraced our community transformation with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone, especially me. The smell of barbecue smoke drifted from Jake's backyard, where half the neighborhood was gathered for our monthly potluck dinner. These same people who had once viewed me as a dangerous outsider now brought me casseroles, borrowed my tools, and asked my advice on everything from electrical problems to teenager management. It's incredible how quickly fear dissolves when the person spreading it disappears. "It is amazing," Sarah observed, joining Emma and me on the porch with a beer and the satisfied smile of someone who had helped David slay Goliath. Our professional relationship had blossomed into something deeper, built on mutual respect and a shared victory over institutional corruption. The community transformation exceeded my wildest dreams. With their rent reduced to half their previous mortgage payments, families suddenly had money for home improvements, their children's education, and actual emergency savings. Mrs. Peterson had started a thriving community garden where Victoria's Aesthetic Compliance Committee used to issue citations for unapproved flower colors. The kids who had once been taught to fear me now knocked on my door asking for help with science projects, drawn by stories of the electrician who had outsmarted the adults with nothing but patience and legal documents. But the most meaningful change was the Silas Brennan Community Justice Fund, established with money recovered from Victoria's fraudulent schemes. The fund now provided free legal aid for families fighting corrupt homeowner associations across 3 states and had already helped expose similar financial crimes in 17 communities. "We got another call yesterday," Sarah reported, checking her phone. "A family in Oregon is facing the exact same playbook. The city council is trying to condemn their family farm for an Amazon warehouse, using the same bogus community benefit arguments Victoria used for her resort deal." Emma looked up from her scholarship letter, her eyes blazing with inherited determination. "Are we going to help them, Dad?" "We're going to try, sweetheart. Uncle Silas taught me that real power builds communities instead of tearing them down." The financial resolution had been surprisingly healing. Rather than maximizing profits, I had offered longtime residents the opportunity to purchase their land at cost, with zero-interest financing through the Justice Fund. Most chose to stay and become genuine homeowners for the first time in decades. The development rights Victoria had promised to Mountain Vista Resorts, I donated them to the Colorado Conservation Trust, ensuring the surrounding wilderness would remain wild for Emma's children and their grandchildren to explore. Property values had actually increased, despite, or perhaps because of, the cooperation that replaced Victoria's authoritarian control. It turns out people pay premium prices to live where neighbors help instead of harass each other. As purple twilight settled over the mountain peaks, I reflected on Uncle Silas's profound wisdom. He had kept the secret of his land ownership for decades, waiting for the right person and the right moment to use that power constructively. Some secrets are too dangerous for weak hands, but become instruments of justice in strong ones. Emma was reading college brochures by the porch light when Sarah handed me a thick envelope postmarked from Portland. That Oregon family I mentioned, they've heard about our victory and want to know if the guy who destroyed an entire corrupt HOA can help them save their century-old farm from corporate greed. I opened the envelope, breathing in the scent of hope and new challenges. Another David versus Goliath story. Another chance to prove that ordinary people with extraordinary determination can still triumph against corrupt systems. Ready for your old man to take on City Hall next, Emma? Her grin was pure mischief mixed with fierce pride. Let's do it, Dad. But this time, I want to help with the legal research. As we planned our next battle for justice, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the valley where Victoria's angry threats used to ring. Sometimes, the sweetest victory is building something so beautiful that it erases the memory of ugliness.